we need to be raising children to solve local problems. And I want our schools to do that. Because I genuinely feel that until we're able to change the way in which we educate children, not just in Nigeria, but Africa more broadly, we will not be able to get to that point where we are no longer dealing with the challenges and the situations and the issues that we're having. It starts with education.
Welcome to episode 2 of Roots and Values, the podcast of Nsiona Impact. And today I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Rosa Lambert. Thank you for joining, Rosa.
It's a pleasure.
You come all the way from Liverpool, 6 a.m. train this morning. So you really wanted to be here, right?
I'm super excited.
Thank you for doing this. And Damilola, we're so pleased to have you.
Thank you.
So pleased to have you.
Thank you so much.
I have to say, full disclosure, Damilola and I got to know each other when I joined JPMorgan Asset Management in 2009. You were so welcoming.
Oh, thank you so much.
You really introduced me to the whole team and I felt really welcome. So thank you again for that. And we meet today because fast forward a few years, you are now established in Nigeria and you've set up your own school.
Yeah. Life has changed a lot. We met over 15 years ago now. And for me, being in Nigeria has been a journey. And we're going to obviously get into that and talk about that a lot more. But yes, we have an education company now in Nigeria, Lagos, Nigeria, called Key Academy, which focuses on transforming education in Nigeria.
Excellent. What does KEY stand for?
It's an acronym for Keep Educating Yourself. So
excellent.
It's the saying basically saying that, we are continually learning. Life is a journey, a life journey just learning. And for us, it's really important to understand that, this is what our organization represents, a lifelong journey.
Fantastic. And I hear that Key Academy has just been nominated for the award of Best School in the World.
Yes. So we've been nominated for the World's Best School Prize in Innovation. The first ever time a school in Nigeria or West Africa has been nominated in the innovation category. So it's a massive deal for us. We're really excited. It's been a good few weeks of voting. So the winner is announced through public votes. And we hopefully will hear the results, good results, in October.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Just for that, that's an amazing achievement. I think, Rosa, it's time to go into the roots, isn't it?
Yes, you have such a fascinating story. So could you please start by telling us a little bit about how and where did you grow up?
Okay, so I was born in Nigeria, in Ibadan, Nigeria. I left when I was 2.5 to go to the UK. So first generation Nigerian immigrants living in the UK. I grew up in Brixton, South London, and spent most of my formative years there, and then went on to university in Manchester. Started a career in finance and lived in London up until about 13 years ago.
Well, that's a journey in itself already. So having these two cultures, how did you navigate these two cultures when you were growing up, but also in adult life? What were some of the perhaps challenges or even the things that you really enjoyed?
Good question. So growing up, I was very much Nigerian, because often you think that being a first generation immigrant in the UK, that you wouldn't necessarily, I guess you would adopt the UK culture. But given the environment I was living in, it was predominantly like Nigeria. South London, there was a lot of Caribbeans and a lot of West Africans as well. So I was surrounded by a lot of Nigerian people, family members, extended family members, friends. So the Nigerian culture was very much a part of who I was. Whether or not I wanted to identify with it was another story. But it was very much there. So I've been I've always sort of navigated both in a sort of parallel way. Having grown up in the UK, so very much familiar with the UK culture and embedded in it, but also, very much raised by Nigerians, Nigerians who grew up in Nigeria. My parents didn't grow up here. They came here in adult life. So they were very much Nigerian. So having that, was an interesting dynamic. Fun sometimes, really hard sometimes, depending on what environments I found myself in. But it was an interesting dynamic.
Did you find any clashes sometimes in terms of?
Oh, goodness. I mean, more teenage clashes that you'd have with your parents. But I think it's, I wouldn't say my parents were strict, but they were very clear on, what was required of me. I'm the eldest child as well. So you do have that sort of first child energy. And, I was the one that sort of did most things first. So, I was studious. I had to work really hard. I knew I had to study hard. Also knew that, I wanted more than the kind of environment that I was in, the lifestyle that we had. And, the message I continually got as I was growing up was, you had to work for it. So, having parents that really focused on that and sometimes, missed out on some of the other, should I say, softer areas or kind of well-rounded areas. It's kind of when I think about the way I'm raising my children now and the things that I think about and talk about, I would say some of that was missing from my upbringing. I also understand why, because, it's first generation immigrants, it's survival. That's what it is. You're surviving and you want your children who you've brought to a country to ensure that they're able to, get through the system and become very successful. So that is the focus and all of the energy and effort goes into that.
In Damilola, you talk about wanting more. Who did it come from, yourself or your parents?
That is a good question. I'm loving these questions. I think it, I was very aware that we didn't have much. I was really aware. It wasn't something that was, I had to sort of seek out or try to figure out. It was really obvious that, we lived in social housing for most of my life. All of my, and so I sort of started adult life. So I was really aware that we didn't have much. And I would look around me and think, I want more than this. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I knew I wanted more. There's a really interesting story my mum told me. I was 8 years old and we lived on the third floor of this council estate in South London, in Brixton. And I remember looking out the window and it's like a courtyard. I think it's like a 1930s building. And I looked out the window and I just said to my mum that I don't want to always live here. I want more. And she said to me, well, you're going to have to really work hard. And for me, it was, I could see that this wasn't it. There has to be more to life. And I wanted to have sort of more exposure. I wanted to be successful from a very young age. So I worked really hard. I always say to people that I wasn't always the smartest person at school, but I was one of the really hardworking ones.
In talking about school, so you started with a local school?
Yes.
And then how did the education?
Yeah, okay, good question. So I went to a local government school in Brixton, and I did that for primary school, and then went on to a secondary school in Tulse Hill. Again, government school. It was an all-girls school, which is really interesting. I would say our school, the demographics was probably about 95% Black, Caribbean and African students. So again, I was very familiar with learning and working amongst people that looked just like me. It was fun. I really enjoyed my school days. I really did. I worked really, really hard. I was a bit of a teacher's pet. Like I used to I used to strive for like the prizes and the certificates and things like that. I got a lot of value and worth through that kind of thing. So I would really push for that, regardless of how it may have made me look. But that was what I was really striving for. And then one of my teachers, my science teacher, Mr. Warner, I interestingly enough, I can't remember how it happened, but I applied for an independent school, a private school. But my parents couldn't afford it. So I would need to either go on some sort of scholarship or bursary to actually attend the school. And I don't know why I applied. I actually don't know why. I think what must have happened is...
What age were you?
Gosh, I was 16, because this was applying for sixth form. So I must have been about sort of 15 or 16 or so. I do not know how I applied or why. All I know is I remember just filling out a number of different forms for a number of sixth forms and colleges across the sort of South London area. And this happened to be one of them. Fortunately for me, Mr. Warner's wife worked at the sixth form of this private school. And she mentioned to him, wow, we've had this application from someone in your school, because he worked in a state school, in a government school. So he then stopped me and he says, Danny, my wife told me that you're applying for this school. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not going to get in. I just applied because it was just kind of like scatter, apply everywhere. And he's like, no, you should go for it. I remember thinking, me, really? Like, we can't afford it. How am I going to get into this private school? And he said, just go for it. There are assisted places they can support with your like learning fees and things like that. And I thought, okay, let me just give this a try. So I applied. I had to do like an exam. And then what it was like a scholarship bursary place. So I can't remember the exact details, but my mum would have to pay, I think it was like 10% of the fees or something, and the rest of it was covered. But it was a conditional offer. So I had to get a certain number of A's at GCSEs in order to get into the school. And I worked my socks off. Once I realized that this is exactly what I wanted to do in this school that I wanted to be in, and I felt the doors and the opportunities that were open for me, I remember in my final year of GCSEs just working like crazy. I mean, my mum will tell you there were tears. Wow. But I was just going for it because I had to get, and it was quite, I remember it was quite a tough offer. I think they wanted something like 7 A's or something like that. It was quite, it's quite hard to achieve. And so I had to work really, 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 really hard. And I remember on the results day of GCSEs, my mum came with me, and I got my results. And I think it was like predominantly A stars and A's. I think I got like 2 B's and a C or something, but the rest of it were like A stars and A's. So I like more than got the place. And my mum was just writing it because she knows how much I put into it. And this is the thing, I always say that I was never the smartest child at school, but I was really, really hardworking, because I knew that if I worked really hard, I could pretty much do anything. That's what I felt. I felt if I worked really hard, I could get into this school. If I got into this school and worked really hard, it would open doors, I'll get into like really good university, and just also have that on my, should I say, my record, like, my background. I've been to this school, I've done this, I've done that, I've moved on. So I realized from a very young age that hard work equates to success. And so for me, it was work hard, success. Work hard for success. And that was, and I say I realized from a young age, but I think my parents probably instilled some of that in me as well, so yeah.
So now you've then you end up going in the finance sector through your university, etc. And in 2013, you and your family, you decide to move to Nigeria. So I'm very curious to hear how this happened, as myself currently, I'm trying to convince my husband, who's from Côte d'Ivoire, to move to Côte d'Ivoire. So far, it's been very unsuccessful. So how did this come about for your family, and what were some of the challenges that you faced, perhaps you and your children as well?
So my children, so I had, when we moved to Nigeria, it was just my husband and I. So my children were born while we were living in Nigeria. So it was just my husband and I. And I'll be really honest with you. I mean, as I said, I was born in Nigeria, but I grew up in the UK. So I wasn't really familiar. And I was one of those Nigerians who didn't go back home often. So I had a number of friends that I met in university who would go back home maybe over Christmas, Easter. And there was this kind of real connection to Nigeria as a country, but I didn't have that connection. So I left when I was, I would say about 2.5. And then I didn't go back again until I was 26 for a friend's wedding. So there was that massive period where I'd just not been connected. Now, thankfully, because as I said to you earlier, there was a huge Nigerian community within South London, and just within like my environment, church and friends, I was surrounded by Nigerians. So it wasn't that I wasn't connected to the culture. I didn't have any kind of context of the country, So when we decided to move to Nigeria, it was actually one of the reasons because of my husband. So he got a job at a private equity company in Nigeria. And I was still at JP at the time. And, it was a tricky season because I lost my job at JPMorgan. I really did. And I didn't want to move. So there was a period of time where we actually explored me moving to Nigeria with the company, but it didn't work out in the end. So I was eventually headhunted by a bank in Nigeria to work for them. Now, I'll be really honest with you. We were supposed to only be there for a few years. It was like, go to Nigeria, see how it goes, make some money, and then come back to London. So we rented out our apartment, our property, and just thought, okay, it's going to be a 2-year fun, like just exploring new country, new environment, working in a different place. And we absolutely fell in love with it. Like, we fell in love with everything about Nigeria. And it was really clear quite early on that this is where we wanted to settle. This is where we wanted to be. This is where we wanted to raise our family. This is where we wanted to work. And then obviously the vision for like impact and the work that I wanted to do in Nigeria started as well. So it was, I say to people that it wasn't challenging for me because people always ask me, was it really difficult? And I think it really wasn't because, thankfully and fortunately, I traveled a lot around the world. So I've seen different parts of the world, both developed and developing and, countries that have challenges and things like that. So, moving to Nigeria, because I didn't have that context that most Nigerians do, or some Nigerians who are now based in the UK where they've grown up there and they have maybe some kind of negative stories or things like that. I didn't have that context. So for me, moving to Nigeria is like moving to any other new country. And I just need to figure it out and figure out how things work. Obviously, you had some horror stories. Oh, this happens and that happens and this happens, that happens. And I was a bit scared going in just because of some of that. But by the time I got there and I realized actually it really isn't what a lot of people say. And the bad press that we get generally as a country isn't the reality. I was able to kind of really navigate that. But I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I was just really fortunate. The company that I went into, the friends that I made. And again, I should mention that a lot of my friends that I made at university had also moved to Nigeria around the same time. So I was fortunate to have a little network of friends based there as well. So it was honestly a really smooth transition for me. And I really loved it.
And then you decided to set up the school at some point.
Yeah.
How did that come about? My question to you is, what is the problem that you try to solve?
Okay. So the problem I'm trying to solve is this. As I mentioned to you earlier, what education did for me when I was in the UK as first generation Nigerian immigrant was it allowed me to climb up the social mobility ladder and it changed the course of my life, right? So it meant that I started with nothing. My parents didn't have much. But through education, I was able to, go into university, get a good job and, work in finance and things like that. Now, moving to Nigeria, I realized that many children in my position weren't able to use education as that. Education couldn't allow them to climb up social mobility ladder. And that's because our education system is predominantly broken. There are issues, there are challenges, there's lack of investment. There's a lot of work that needs to happen to reform the way in which we educate children in Nigeria. So that's the problem I'm trying to solve now. Initially, when I started the education company in the school, I was looking for a school for my children. That was what I was trying to do. So I was looking for a school for my children that essentially prepared them for the world in which they were growing up in. So what I could see is a number of the schools, even the international schools in Nigeria, were still sort of focused on sort of rote learning, memorization, standardized testing, things like that. And I wanted something that educated my children holistically and looked at their learning, not just in core subjects like sort of maths and English and sciences, but also in some of the soft skills, 21st century skills that we could see was becoming a lot more important and necessary in the working world. So things like problem solving and critical thinking and resilience and collaboration and creativity, these types of skills that aren't ordinarily taught or explored in school, in traditional schools. I wanted my children to have that sort of experience in their education, so more holistic. I thought I could home educate them. That was the plan because I couldn't find a school that was essentially all-encompassing of these things. And realized that was really difficult in Nigeria because we do have a home education community, but it's a bit fragmented. So people are in all parts of the country. And unfortunately, we don't have things like many public parks and museums and libraries and the kind of things that would really supplement a well-rounded home education experience, which is what I wanted for my children. So I didn't want them to just study at home, but actually have this sort of well-rounded experience. So I soon realized that was impossible, and then sort of started this sort of mother-baby group. I'm not sure if your wife or you attended them when you have a young baby, and you go along to these groups where you take part in immersive play sessions with other young children. And these sessions were essentially developing some of these 21st century skills as well, exploring and playing and really learning how to kind of communicate and collaborate and understand the world around them and things like that. So it was a really fun and immersive session. I started that when was that? My daughter was born in 2016, so it must have been 2017-ish. And we did that for a few years, and our children became older. And the question now was, do they now go into school? Because they're now old now. So, they're that sort of school age, and one of the mums I'll never forget said, why don't you transition this into a school? And I remember saying to a school, I can do this. This is like cute. This is small. This is kind of controlled. And, I've been doing a lot of research into sort of play-based learning and how children learn and grow and develop through play-based learning. So I fully felt comfortable in that area. But a school for me was like a completely different animal. And, how will I do that? What would that look like? But it took some time of really trying to, deal with my doubts and fears and concerns. Imposter syndrome, which is only something I'm only recently being able to sort of overcome, if I'm honest. But I got to that point where I said, yeah, I can do this. I can do this. As I said to you earlier, one thing I know I can do is I can work really, really hard. I can learn, I can understand, I can figure out what I need to know to do this. And I set on that journey. And that's, essentially how the school came about. That was a few years of a lot of hard work and research, understanding how it would look like in a Nigerian context as well. I was very, very specific on not wanting to adopt a school that exists in another part of the world and bringing it to Nigeria. But what I wanted to do is develop an education process that really was contextualized.
So how did you go about that? I'd like to understand, how do you kind of fine-tuned it to the Nigerian local?
Good question. So I spent a lot of time researching and understanding how some of these progressive 21st century schools were operating in different parts of the world. What's a day like? What's a day look like in these schools? I contacted and communicated with a number of schools, visited some as well, to really understand what this looks like. And I could immediately see, I was very familiar with the Nigeria context, but we just didn't have a school like this in Nigeria. So what I was able to do was take some of the learnings from these schools and a lot of the research that I've done, bring it to Nigeria, but then contextualize it and localize it. So when we think about the learning that we do at Key Academy in the moment, we really include a lot of our local environment and the problems that we face within our local environment. When I think about some of the play-based examples that the younger children in the school do. So for example, you may be learning in the UK about sort of spring, winter, autumn, summer, because you have those seasons. Those seasons don't translate in Nigeria. So for me, it's like, why don't we learn about the seasons in Nigeria? So you're talking about Harmattan and dry season, rainy season, with the context of this is what seasons look like in other parts of the world. Do you see what I mean? So for me, it was always looking at what the learning program was and the philosophy was, bringing it into a Nigerian context, and how do we make this make sense for the children in this school? And why? Because children need to see themselves in what they're learning. They need to understand and see that I am this person, this makes sense to me in my world. And I think that's really, really important. And I think when I think about international education, especially in some of the more developed worlds, what we're looking at is bringing in these sort of international education models and just plonking them in the country with no real understanding of what's happening around them. The homes that these children are going back into, the environment they're in, but it's just international education. And you're like, great, international education, but how does that fit into the world in which they live in, and how do we contextualize it? And I think that's really, really important. I mean, it's not just within education, it's in a number of different industries that, we don't just all bring here, okay, it works here, bring it to Nigeria. It may work in Nigeria, but how do we contextualize it so that it does work, so it speaks to the people of Nigeria? And I think that's really, really important.
How did parents react?
Good question. Parents initially were a bit skeptical. Right? They were, because we all went to conventional schools. So we understand what that looked like. So when you're bringing this new type of schooling, where learning was a lot more collaborative, where you weren't drilling children to learn their numbers and their colors and everything from a very young age, and where you were working on projects that solved genuine problems in their communities, I think the concern was, are they learning? Are they actually learning? And we spent a lot of time demonstrating what learning in this way looks like and actually showing it. Because again, unfortunately, we don't have another school to point to. So we were the pioneers. So we had to demonstrate it and show it. So we spent the first few years, and even till this day, we're still like refining, fine-tuning, kind of pivoting in some areas as well to really explain this style of learning to parents and our community, because it's new. And anything new really needs to be explained. I mean, you can go off and say this is great and everybody should just sort of jump on the bandwagon and figure it out. But actually, if you want people to genuinely come on board, and a big part of the way we learn is that we partner with parents. So for them to genuinely come on board and be a part of this, they really need to understand it. So we spend a lot of time communicating and working with our parents. They do that. So one of the things that we do that started from the beginning is as I said, we realized that parents sometimes didn't quite understand it and they had a few questions. So we established a process where we meet with our parents every single week. And it's remotely, so you don't have to come in. It's a 15-minute catch-up, we call it, every single week. And we share the learning that's taken place at school, as well as tell you about, and you tell us about learning that's taken place in your home, recognizing that actually it's a partnership in order for this to work. And there'll be things that you observe at home that we would then say, it's because we did this at school, and vice versa. So again, a parent can use that opportunity to ask questions, to understand the process more. And we put a lot out there. So if you look at our socials, our website, we write a lot. There's a lot of information that we're constantly sharing because we recognize being a pioneer in this area of education means that you need to share, you need to explain, you need to bring people on board. And it's a journey and it takes time. And I think one of the things we've been is very patient in that. So we haven't been really in a rush to grow. It needs to be a massive school. That's not, and we can get into that a bit later, but that's not our focus. Our focus is actually on the quality of the education that we're providing and ensuring that we have a community of parents and stakeholders within our community that also understand it and they're on board with it. So for us, it's really important that we continually share.
And in terms of numbers, what is it like now? How many students?
So just under about 100 students, and that is from the ages of 1.5 up until 11. Well, in September this year, we're launching our final learning group for primary. We call them the shoots. So we start with the bees, the seeds, the roots, the buds, and the shoots. And they're grass
seeds. Really speaks to us.
Yes, and that's those are primary school year groups, and that's the final year that we're launching in September. So we have just under 100 students.
And where's the school today in terms of sort of key services? Who do you serve? So you talk about your community, you talk about providing very locally apt service, education service. How do these children and families end up in the school? Is it free for everybody? Is it on selective basis? What is the sort of the model?
Okay, so it's a fee-paying school. So when you think about a school like ours in Nigeria, it can't exist without it being fee-paying because there's a cost to developing and running a school like this, firstly. And secondly, our government in Nigeria are not at that point yet where they heavily invest in education. So schools aren't necessarily getting the government funding that they need or the support that they need to do what they do. So what you find is a number of schools in the private space specifically are fee-paying. Pretty much, I'm sure all of them are fee-paying schools. And ours is a fee-paying school. Now, people find out about us predominantly through word of mouth. Now, while we do put a lot of our content on socials and things like that out there. And we do have a website and, we do share a lot. What we found through speaking to parents who have enrolled their children is a lot of it is through word of mouth. And I think because we're now 6 years old, we've now sort of proven the concept a bit. So people are a lot more comfortable with this style of learning and they're seeing other children growing through it, understanding, okay, well, if this child is going through it and they're actually developing and they're thriving and I can see how my child will thrive also, I'm more comfortable and confident in enrolling my children in the school. So generally it's through word of mouth. Children living within the sort of Lagos Island environs for now. And I say for now because, our focus is not to launch more than one school. So we're not going to be this sort of big, massive school. What we want to do is take the learnings that we've learned and we've developed at Key Academy and translate that into schools across Nigeria, using a technology platform that trains educators across the country. And for me, that's key because there's one thing to have a school that is amazing, but it can never serve the majority of the children. It can never serve the little Dannies that I mentioned before who are in Nigeria. And how do we get to those children? Because some of them can't afford to attend a school like this. So if we can create a technology platform that actually trains teachers across Nigeria, what we're able to do is take the learning that we're doing at Key and essentially transform classrooms across the country. So that's very much a big part of what we do. So we sort of started off as a school. We've kind of grown into this education company that really wants to have impact in the area of 21st century project-based learning.
I think this is a really nice segue into the following questions that we have on the sort of macro level views and visions that you have for the education sector in Nigeria, and why not Africa more broadly, right? And so one of the questions that I would have, having myself roots in Finland and having enjoyed a wonderful public education system, and you shared your own story on what school did to you here in the UK. So we know that providing education is one of the core welfare services provided by the government. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, currently over 18 million children out of school, right? You mentioned some of the issues in terms of budgeting, funding. However, the government still has the mandate to provide nationwide education. So what is your vision on balancing sort of these private education initiatives and then actually strengthening the public education system in a way that we can really deliver to all Nigerian children?
I think for me, when I think about the work that we're doing, policy reform is fundamental, right? We can't do what we do without actually having the government on board and supporting the work that we're doing. So I agree that, a private education is not an education that the majority of Nigerian children can even afford. But what we can do is we can use the work that we've developed within Key, as I mentioned, and use that to reach teachers first and train them so that their classrooms, wherever they are in Nigeria, can be transformed to this style of learning. Now, it's going to take time. I always say to people, education is a slow burn. And, with everything that's going on in this world right now, where people are looking for really, really quick returns, I'm always hesitant when people are looking for that in education. For any country to succeed, they need to spend the time, and that often takes years to invest in their education system. As you know, in Finland as well, right? It takes time. And I think often when we're looking for things to happen very, very quickly, especially when you look at other industries where you're having very, very quick shifts, whether it's like telecoms or, fintech at the moment, it's quite a big thing in Nigeria. It's like people are looking for things to happen very quickly. And that's great. But within education, it doesn't happen that quickly. And there needs to be a slow burn in terms of how do we, first of all, reform policy? How do we change what we're doing and how we're doing it? So for us, building our nationwide teacher training platform is fundamental and key. And we're hoping through then we're able to actually start impacting policy reform. Because if we're able to demonstrate and show that we are training educators across the country in this style of learning, and it's transforming their classrooms, and we've got the numbers to back it, then it's an easier conversation to have with policymakers. But we have to start somewhere, because I genuinely believe that there's one thing to just say it, but there's another thing to actually demonstrate it and do it. And for me, it's really important that we spend that time demonstrating and showing how it can be done. And yes, it won't be immediate, all of a sudden, X million teachers are being trained. But over time, that number will begin to grow, especially with technology. And that's one of the blessings of technology, especially within education. It allows you to reach teachers and classrooms and spaces and schools that ordinarily you couldn't get to, especially where we have infrastructure issues in Nigeria. So using our technology platform to really take our learning, our know-how, our experiences, our training, and, impart a school in Kano, for example, for me would be incredibly fulfilling, and if we can continue to do that and transform the lives of these educators, because I think that's the key, actually. It's investing in the teachers, and we don't spend enough time or spend enough money doing that within Nigeria. And if we're able to invest in our teachers and train them and develop them in these styles of learning, I think we'll see a ripple effect and a change in our education system.
You mentioned the investment community indirectly and the quick wins. How do we attract them to projects like this?
Good question. How do we attract them? For me, I think about, we are going into a fundraising round, right? So we are, as I said, we're a primary school now. We want to launch a secondary school in 2027. We want to build and develop a purpose-built school on 15,000 square meters of land in Lagos, Nigeria. Now, where and how we find these people is really difficult because we do need support. We were bootstrapped initially, privately funded initially. And it's like now we're at that point where we're looking for me, it's like-minded individuals, right? People that are not necessarily in Nigeria. They could be Nigerians in diaspora, but they have a vision and they have a desire, they have a dream to want to change things, right, in their own small way. And I think sometimes, I always say to you, I think I had this conversation with you, Alan, is that, everybody doesn't need to move to Nigeria to fix Nigeria. I don't actually agree with that. I think some people are called to do that and some people can do that, but some people can help from wherever they are in the world. And I think if we can find like-minded individuals who recognize that it takes time to really develop education and who are patient in that sense, that's kind of where we need to be. How I find them is what I'm still trying to figure out now, if I'm honest with you. But I have a vision of what they need to look like, the values, the fact that they want to have impact, the fact they're not looking for quick returns, the fact that they understand that this is something that will take a few years to actually develop. For me, it's really, really important. And also, another thing that I think is really important to mention is I also think that we often don't talk about sustainability enough within education. And I think it's really important that schools, education companies should also think about ways to be sustainable. So it's not that you're constantly relying on external funding, grant funding and things like that. So one of the things that we're also looking to do, and this will not only further the vision that we have to kind of impact education, 21st century learning in Nigeria, is we're also looking to develop publishing, digital content and books for children. And I think that's really, really important because a lot of the books and digital content that children in Nigeria consume today is from an international lens. I mentioned to you before that I think it's important that children see themselves in the learning that they're doing. So, and that's a way to become sustainable because that, you can then, for example, sell and distribute your books across the world. And I think that, again, is really, really important. So we need to think about ways in which we can not only attract this type of funding, but also be sustainable because I think investors and funders also want to understand that. And often they don't necessarily get that full picture within the education space. And often maybe that's why they stay away. So I think if we're able to demonstrate that, I think it'll be really, really interesting.
Damilola, I like the fact that you are candid. You're not pretending to have all the answers, all fixed. And I'd like to come back a little bit to your journey as an entrepreneur. We were both employees when we last met, and now we're both on the other side. So I need to learn from you. What were the tough moments? What were they like and what kept you going?
Goodness. Doubt. Like a lot of doubt. For so long, I felt that because I come from a finance background and not an education background, that people necessarily would struggle to believe me, right? Or would think that I was qualified to do what I was doing. Although I've done all the work and I have really studied and done the research into this area, I still felt because I'm just not a traditional educationist, so therefore people are going to really struggle. And I think some of that was also my own personal doubt as well. I guess I'm someone that growing up, I've always felt that, you need to know something inside out and then you are the expert in that area. Does that make sense? Or you need to have spent time studying this and therefore you're the expert. And while I've spent time studying and done the research, that isn't my background. So I had to spend a lot of time just, dealing with my own internal battles and imposter syndrome to say, you can do this. You are qualified to do this. And I think for me, the validation was when children were enrolling. And I remember the first, we had a pilot term where we essentially rented out a small space in an existing school to test out this new model for education in Lagos, Nigeria. And firstly, the lady who runs the school, I will be like forever grateful to her because, it was almost, I was a school in her school. It was kind of semi-competition, right? But I don't know, I guess she saw beyond me. And she was incredibly gracious to allow me to rent this space in her school to essentially trial this model of education. And the first children that came in that day, I think we had in total about 8, and 2 of them were mine, so only 6. And I remember thinking, wow, people are coming to this school. Like it's something that's been on like in your head and on paper and in decks, and it's been conversations, but then to actually see children walk into the school and take their shoes off, and it was a moment. I'll be honest with you, kind of step back and think, wow. And there's been many of these small moments across the whole 6-year journey. Most recently, some of our older children presenting their projects. At the end of every term, they present their projects. They work on a problem through the term. They develop either a product or a service or something along those lines that encompasses all of this learning, 21st century learning, as well as their core skills. And then they present it to an audience, and often their parents or others within our community. And just watching them present so confidently this project that they'd worked on for the past 12 weeks at the ages of 9, 8 years old, 9 or 7 years old, some of them, it was one of those moments again, those kind of validating moments that we are doing the right thing. We are making impact. And if we can get this style of learning into the hands of more children in Nigeria, I mean, it would have transformational generational change. And I say that because the children are learning through doing, right? They're change makers from a very young age and learning to problem solve. And one of the challenges we have in Nigeria or across the whole continent is we just don't have enough problem solvers. We don't have enough people solve. We have problems. We all know that. We can list them from now till eternity, right? But how many people are equipped to actually solve those problems, actually even see them as solvable problems? That's another thing. We can talk about the issues and the problems, but we don't see them as things that we can solve. And we're raising children from a very young age that you can solve any single problem. So you could see something and solve it. And there was another project they worked on recently where they had to look into, an issue they saw and basically create inventions. And what I loved about it is we left it to children to create inventions. And, one of the children came up with an invention that solved like a sewage issue that she saw in her local area. And this is the kind of things, and she's 6 years old.
That's impressive.
But you see what I mean? And so imagine like you're learning in a way that you're seeing these problems and you're thinking, but I can solve it. Like I don't have to just walk past it. Or I don't have to complain about it. I can actually solve it. And I think that's going to definitely move the needle. So these sort of things are they validate like the work that we're doing constantly. And then it helps me to kind of get over my imposter syndrome and, just challenges around like, are people going to understand? I'm so convicted about what we do. I mean, my own children are in the school, right? So I'm convicted. I believe in it. But, sometimes I think naturally, when you're doing anything, you often think, do people understand it? Do they get it? And we do spend a lot of time thinking about messaging and how we work on that.
Do you get enough support yourself in your journey as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'm really, really fortunate. So I have an amazing husband who is like my unofficial, official like sounding board. He calls himself the unpaid employee. So I genuinely find that I'm always sharing a lot with him, which is incredibly helpful. And I have a number of mentors as well who support me in the work that I do. But I find a lot of the learning comes through doing and through the experiences. And yeah, I think I'm open to that journey. Does that make sense? I'm open to the fact that I don't have it all figured out. And I'm constantly learning and constantly developing and learning new things. But I feel that when I need the support, I know exactly who to go to and when. And it's often in certain things. So for example, there's a mentor friend of mine who is like supporting in like an area of, getting parent feedback to understand exactly what their thoughts are, especially as we're now moving into a new phase of growth for the secondary school in 2027. So she's helping with that. But, there's a lot of I know who to call on when I need it. And I say that because I feel I'm really institutionalized. I don't feel this entrepreneurial journey was anything that I was looking for in any way, shape, or form. I was a very, very good employee. And I really enjoyed it. I love being part of a well-oiled machine that worked, and I didn't have to worry about what's happening here or there because I was focused on my bit right here. And, that was kind of, and I love that, I love being part of an institution. I love that. So this entrepreneurial journey was really an eye-opener for me. One I wasn't expecting. I actually thought that my plan was to essentially, as I said to you, sort of stop working finance, quit my job, spend time focused on my children. Get to a point where I was senior enough to, if I wanted to come back, I could, but that was the plan. So entrepreneurship sort of kind of happened to me. It wasn't intentional. And so it's been an interesting journey, sort of navigating all of the various stages, but incredibly rewarding. And I always say to people, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but then also the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life as well. So kind of, you take both of it.
It truly is inspirational. We can say that. Let me ask you one question, because you have talked a lot about developing learning materials, curriculum that really fits with the local culture. You are based there in Lagos in person. And, when we zoom out a little bit and we look at the debates around development practice and even philanthropic endeavor in Africa, we often criticize that, a lot of these actors actually originate from the global north. William Easterly famously spoke about the white man's burden, but you're really embedded in that. How do you see your sort of dual culture, having grown up in the UK, having Nigerian roots, now being there? How has that been an advantage, but perhaps also a challenge for you as an actor in this sector?
Yeah, so I think the advantage for me is that I've seen it done before. Does that make sense? And not necessarily what we're doing at Key Academy, but building excellence, institutions, good practice. I've seen all of these things done. I've worked in these institutions. I've worked in these environments. So I know what good and excellence looks like. And that kind of runs through me. That sort of runs through my veins. So I think that's the advantage that I have, right? So I can see what we're doing here in Nigeria. I have an experience for what I've been doing in the UK, for example, and I can see, okay, I know what needs to happen here for it to look like this. Does that make sense? So there's that. I think some of the challenges is, I'm operating in an environment I didn't grow up in, so there's newness at all times. But I'm also very, very open to embracing it. I'm not, I didn't grow up in Nigeria, so I don't sound, Nigerian, right? You can tell that I grew up in the UK, most people. So it's like, I'm not trying to hide that. Does that make sense? I am who I am. I'm Nigerian, grew up in the UK. I sound like this. I'm living in Nigeria and I've been living here now for 13 years. And that's me, and I feel like I show up as that. Does that make sense? I think initially I wasn't quite sure how to show up. When you're coming into a new environment, especially when I came into finance, I wasn't quite sure how to show up. But I soon realized that the most authentic version of you is the best version, right? And that's how you show up every single day. So being authentically who you are and being very confident in who you are and, just accepting that this is who I am, right? And I think, funny enough, people gravitate towards that. They gravitate towards that authenticity. And I've been very blessed to have, just things around me that has meant that I've been able to navigate this. But along that journey, I've always kind of stayed true to who I am, because I am who I am, So, and sometimes, you may think, oh gosh, I wonder if I had like this PhD in education, maybe that would mean this. But actually, it might be a superpower that I don't have this PhD in education. I do have this finance background and business background. And this is what is actually impacting the way I work and how efficiently we're working, and how, the fact that we were, as I said, we were initially kind of like privately funded by myself, by my family. And, moving into a space where we're now, we are generating a profit as a school, and we're able to use that and employ that into other things and developing all of these other initiatives that I've mentioned to you. So for me, it's like, that has worked. I've proven it. I have proved that it can work. So I think being authentically me and showing that I can operate and work in this environment, has been like one of the things that I've stayed true to, and I think it's important that I continually show that as well, because sometimes people often think, especially if you're considering moving to Nigeria, that, how can I move to Nigeria? What's going to happen? What does it mean? I think for me, I'm probably, proof that, you may not have been brought up there and you may not have been raised there, but actually if you find your way and you find your purpose and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, things do work out for you. And I do think that as well, that I do think that when you're doing what you should be doing, exactly what you should be doing, things fall into place, and this isn't taking away from hard work.
Yeah.
Right.
Good.
I know that I had to work hard and I continue to work hard. But because I feel that I'm exactly where I need to be right now, doing exactly what I'm doing and having the impact that I'm having, things are falling into place for me. And that again is further validation as well.
And I'm sure that you kind of instilling these values into the children that you are teaching and supporting as well.
Absolutely.
Damilola, when you arrived, you said that you fell in love with Nigeria. Was that a surprise to you?
Yeah.
I thought it would be.
It really was. Oh my goodness. How do I explain this? Because it's a feeling, and I don't think I spent enough time sort of thinking through the feeling to articulate it, but bear with me. So I'm going to try. I felt at home immediately. Like I felt like, gosh, this is home. This is where I'm from. These are my people. This is my country. Like I felt that immediately. And, sometimes you hear the negative stories. They're there, right? But again, when you're home, like even at this, say, for example, you live in a really terrible neighborhood, right? But when you go into your home, it's like regardless of what's going on around you, I'm home. I felt that's what I felt when I moved to Lagos. It was like, this is home. Like I felt so connected, even though I wasn't really, because I hadn't grown up there, but I felt so connected to being in Nigeria. I absolutely loved the organization that I worked with when I moved to Nigeria, to move to Lagos. The bank that I was with. I mean, that for me was like cultural awareness training and understanding. I think I was there for about just under 40 years, and I just remember sitting there thinking, gosh, this is different. Like,
do you have any answers?
Like, okay, this is so random, but when hair, women's things, right? So we love this. So one of the things that stood out is when I was in the UK, working in finance, I felt that like I wanted to just fit in and not necessarily stand out. There weren't that many Black people, right, within the organization. And I think because of that, I didn't really want to sort of stand out too much. I just wanted to really fit in, So I felt that I kind of tried to create a presence, like a physical presence that just kind of fit into that mold. Whereas when I moved to Lagos, I loved the way the women were just showing up on a daily basis. It was probably like the most beautiful thing that I saw, because especially with hair, right? And, hair is very much a part of who we are as Black women, right? And one of the most amazing things about our hair is we can do so much with it. Whereas I found, although actually I'm sure my colleagues at JP would probably say, actually, damn, you did a lot with your hair. But I do think that I love the way women were showing up every other week with something different, expressing themselves in a different way, showing up differently. And it was just so empowering. It was really, really, really empowering. And I remember just thinking, wow, this is how women show up in finance. I love this. I absolutely love this. So things like that really stood out to me, but also that I really gravitated towards. And it just felt very, I just felt empowered. I felt emboldened. I thought, this is brilliant. This is beautiful. I could see this, So that's one of the things that really, stood out for me.
Excellent. And if we talk about your ambitions, your dream going forward, and it's all about scalability as well, right? We might think of outside of Nigeria, Africa. So what is like the 5-year, the 10-year, the 15 years? Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah. So for me, my dream, my vision is to transform education in Nigeria. I want the average Nigerian child to be able to have a world-class education at home and confidently compete on a global stage, if necessary, but also feel empowered to stay in Nigeria and continue to develop and have opportunities. Does that make sense? Like, for me, that's key. So I think if we're able to sort of develop the education system, get that right, it will undoubtedly support and develop the work that we're doing within employment, within different industries, because you're having a stronger caliber of candidates coming into the workforce. So for me, that's really, really important. So I want to transform education in Nigeria. I want every child in education in Nigeria who's studying within primary or secondary school to have a transformative form of education, an education that essentially develops skills that are necessary in the world in which they're growing up in, these 21st century skills that I mentioned before. So critical thinking, problem solving, being change makers, being resilient, collaboration, teamwork, things like that is what I want every single child in Nigeria to explore throughout their education. And I want also for our education system to invest a lot more invest a lot more in the teachers and the educators. I think that's key and that's critical. So when I think about 5 years' time, I would love our organization to roll out our nationwide teacher training. So there are educators across Nigeria who are benefiting from being trained in this way of 21st century learning, and therefore changing their classrooms. In 10 years' time, I would love there to be policy reform and changes to the way in which we educate children in Nigeria. I want there to be a clear early years program for children ages 0 to 5 years old, and be a nationwide program to be mandated by the government and used across the country. And the same for primary and the same for secondary. And I want us to be nurturing and raising and educating children to solve our local problems. Like, to me, there is no point in getting them to, they memorize algebra and they can't apply it or use it in their everyday lives. We need to be raising children to solve local problems. And I want our schools to do that, because I genuinely feel that until we're able to change the way in which we educate children, not just in Nigeria, but Africa more broadly, we will not be able to get to that point where we are no longer dealing with the challenges and the situations and the issues that we're having. It starts with education. And I don't feel we don't realize that enough, and we don't focus on that enough. So for me, that would be the goal.
If somebody looking at this wonders how they can help you, what would you say?
Absolutely, get in touch. I would love to share more about what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and how you can support us. For me, that's critical. Finding that tribe, people who understand what you're trying to do, who understand the path that you're walking in, and who want to support, in any way, shape, form. And sometimes this isn't always monetary. It's not always monetary. Sometimes it's through expertise and experience. And, we've had a couple of people literally send me an email saying, I absolutely love what you're trying to do here, and I want to help. I want to help free of charge. I just want to help. I want to bring my expertise and my skills into your organization. How can I do that? So, and if anybody's just willing to support and help, that would be amazing. We're definitely looking for funding, of course. As I mentioned to you before, we're launching our campus in 2027. And, that will be our sort of campus and innovation HQ, where it will house things like our nationwide teacher training, our primary school, our secondary school. So we need funding to do that, So if anybody's genuinely interested in what we're doing or even just wants to learn more, then please get in touch. I mean, I'm online, our organization is online, and you can definitely learn more about what we're doing and the vision and future of what we're doing as well.
That's so great. Thank you so much, Damilola. Thank you
so much for joining us. Thank you so much.
We had such a great time. We learned a lot. So we'll put all the details about you in the description of the podcast. So thank you, Damilola.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for having me. I loved it. Absolutely loved this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.